The Roman Empire, founded in 27 BCE under Augustus, grew into the greatest power of the ancient world, spanning Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its emperors commanded vast armies, its roads and aqueducts connected thriving cities, and Roman law and culture shaped the lives of millions. For centuries, Rome stood as the symbol of order, strength, and civilization. Yet even the strongest empire could not withstand the weight of decline. Corruption at the top, economic troubles, and endless wars along the frontiers left the empire vulnerable. In the west, Germanic tribes pressed deeper into Roman lands. In 410 CE, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome, a shock that signaled how far the empire had fallen. Finally, in 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic leader Odoacer, marking the end of the Western Roman Empire. But the story did not end there. In the east, the Byzantine Empire endured for nearly 1,000 more years, with Constantinople as its fortified heart. It preserved Roman traditions, Christian faith, and ancient knowledge long after the West had collapsed. Still, centuries of conflict weakened it. On May 29, 1453, after a brutal siege, Sultan Mehmed II and the Ottoman army stormed Constantinople, bringing the Eastern Roman Empire to an end. The Roman Empire did not fall in a single moment. It fractured, declined, and was finally conquered. But its legacy still defines much of the modern world. The Byzantine Empire, lasting from 330 to 1453, stood as the eastern continuation of Rome. Its heart was Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, founded by Emperor Constantine III as the new capital of the Roman world. From this crossroads of Europe and Asia, the empire carried forward Roman law, Greek culture, and Orthodox Christianity. At its height, Byzantium stretched across the Balkans, North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, and parts of the Middle East. Its people lived under a powerful imperial court, protected by massive walls and enriched by thriving trade. Emperors like Justinian I expanded its reach and codified laws that influenced Europe for centuries, while magnificent monuments like the Hagia Sophia testified to its wealth and devotion. But survival came at a price. The empire faced endless invasions, from Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Crusaders, and finally, the Ottomans. In 1204, Constantinople fell to the Fourth Crusade, a devastating blow. Though it was reclaimed in 1261, Byzantium never regained its former power. By the 15th century, it had been reduced to Constantinople and a handful of territories. The end came in 1453. Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire launched a massive siege, bombarding the city with giant cannons. On May 29th, Ottoman forces broke through the walls. Emperor Constantine XI fought to the death as the city was overrun. With the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist, and a new power, the Ottoman Empire, rose to dominate the region. The Persian Empire, known as the Achaemenid Empire, was founded in 550 BCE by Cyrus the Great. At its height, it stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt, Anatolia, and the Balkans in the west, making it the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. The empire was built on a system of satrapies, or provinces, each governed locally but loyal to the king. Its rulers, Cyrus, Darius I, and Xerxes I, oversaw vast networks of roads, a postal system, and trade routes that linked Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Persians were known for tolerance of local customs and religions, allowing diverse peoples to coexist under one rule. Monumental cities like Persepolis showcased their wealth and ambition. But maintaining such an empire came with challenges. Costly wars against the Greek city-states drained resources. Rebellions in Egypt and internal rivalries weakened the unity. By the 4th century BCE, succession disputes and corruption left Persia vulnerable. In 334 BCE, Alexander of Macedon launched his campaign eastward. He defeated the Persian armies at the Granicus River, at Issus in 333, and finally at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. King Darius III fled but was later killed during his retreat, leaving the empire leaderless. In 330 BCE, Alexander entered Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, and burned it in a symbolic act of conquest. With the death of Darius and the fall of its great cities, the Achaemenid Empire, once the mightiest power on earth, came to an end. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'll greatly appreciate it if you could show support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you. The Maurya Empire, founded in 322 BCE by Chandragupta Maurya, became the first great empire to unify most of the Indian subcontinent. Centered in Magadha with its capital at Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, it stretched from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau, and from Afghanistan in the west to Bengal in the east. Chandragupta, guided by his advisor Chanakya, built a strong centralized administration with ministers, provincial governors, and an extensive network of spies. His rule created stability and prosperity, making the empire a powerful force in South Asia. His successors carried on his work, but it was his grandson, Ashoka the Great, who brought the empire to its height. After a brutal conquest of Kalinga around 261 BCE, where countless lives were lost, Ashoka turned away from warfare. He embraced Buddhism, renounced violence, and sought to rule through dharma, moral and just governance. He promoted welfare, built roads and hospitals, and inscribed his edicts across the land. Under his reign, the Maurya Empire became not only a political giant, but also a beacon of culture and spiritual thought. But after Ashoka died in 232 BCE, the empire began to fracture. His successors lacked his vision and authority. Regional governors asserted independence, foreign powers pressed into India's northwest, and the central government grew weaker. In 185 BCE, the last Maurya ruler, Brihadratha, was assassinated by his general Pushyamitra Shunga, who founded the Shunga dynasty. The Maurya Empire ended, not in a single battle, but through decline, division, and betrayal. What remained was a mosaic of regional kingdoms, and the enduring legacy of Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism, which spread far beyond India's borders. The Holy Roman Empire, founded on Christmas Day in the year 800 when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as emperor, stood for over 1,000 years as one of Europe's most enduring powers. Centered in Central Europe, it stretched across modern-day Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Low Countries, and northern Italy. Unlike a unified nation, it was a vast and complex federation of kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities bound together under an elected emperor. For centuries, it was viewed as the heir to ancient Rome, blending Christian faith with Germanic political might. Emperors like Otto I, Frederick Barbarossa, and the Habsburg dynasty worked to hold this patchwork together, while the empire's people lived in diverse ways, from peasants in medieval villages to merchants fueling trade across the Rhine, and scholars shaping Europe's intellectual life in universities and monasteries. Yet the same diversity that made the empire influential also weakened it. Power was divided between local rulers, the church, and the emperor, leaving central authority fragile. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century shattered its religious unity, sparking conflicts like the 30 Years' War, which devastated the land and further decentralized control. By the 18th century, the emperor's authority had become more symbolic than real. The final blow came at the hands of Napoleon Bonaparte. After Austria's defeat at Austerlitz in December 1805, Napoleon reorganized much of Central Europe into the Confederation of the Rhine. On August 6, 1806, Emperor Francis II abdicated and formally dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, ending a millennium-old institution that had once claimed to be the successor of Rome. The Mongol Empire, founded in 1206 by Genghis Khan, rose from the vast steppes of Central Asia to become the largest contiguous land empire in world history. At its height, it stretched from the Pacific shores of China to the plains of Eastern Europe, bringing together countless cultures and peoples under one rule. The Mongols lived as nomads, expert horsemen and archers, moving swiftly across the land with unmatched military discipline. Genghis Khan and his successors, including his grandson Kublai Khan, built an empire that encouraged trade, tolerated different religions, and reshaped the Silk Road into a thriving artery of global exchange. By the mid-13th century, the empire controlled more territory than Rome at its greatest extent, yet its vast size became a weakness. After Genghis's death, the empire fractured into four great khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. These states, once united, grew increasingly independent, often clashing with one another and weakening the Mongol world order. The decisive end came in China. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan in 1271, faced economic crisis, corruption, and constant rebellions. In 1368, the Ming dynasty captured Beijing, forcing the Mongols back to the steppe. The once unified empire had dissolved into scattered khanates, each struggling against local powers. The Ottoman Empire, lasting from 1299 to 1922, stood as one of the longest and most influential empires in history. Born in Anatolia under the leadership of Osman Nefer, it grew rapidly, seizing Constantinople in 1453 under Mehmed II, a moment that marked the fall of Byzantium and the dawn of a new era. At its height under Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century, the empire stretched across 3 continents, from the Persian Gulf and North Africa to the gates of Vienna, uniting millions under a sophisticated system of law, military strength, and cultural achievement. Its armies were feared, its trade routes vital, and its cities centers of art, science, and architecture. Yet, the empire began to weaken. By the 17th century, corruption, economic troubles, and defeats against rising European powers slowed its advance. Nationalist uprisings in the Balkans eroded its control, and the empire earned the title the Sick Man of Europe. The 19th century saw further decline, as provinces broke away and Western powers carved influence from its lands. The final blow came during World War I, when the Ottomans allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary. After crushing defeats and the occupation of its capital, the Sultanate was abolished in 1922, ending over 6 centuries of rule. From its dramatic rise to its slow disintegration, the Ottoman Empire's story concluded with the birth of modern Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, closing the chapter on one of history's greatest empires. The Spanish Empire, lasting from 1492 to 1898, was the first true global empire in history. Born from Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic, it stretched from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, covering vast lands and oceans. At its height, it controlled nearly 13 million square kilometers, fueled by silver and gold from colonies, and ruled by powerful monarchs such as Charles V and Philip II. The empire spread Catholicism, the Spanish language, and culture, but its reach was built on conquest, forced labor, and resistance from the people it sought to dominate. For centuries, Spain stood as a superpower, but its strength slowly weakened. Military conflicts with rival European powers, economic decline, and corruption eroded its dominance. By the early 19th century, waves of independence movements swept across Latin America. One by one, Spain's colonies, from Mexico to Argentina, broke free, leaving only Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam under Spanish control. The final blow came in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Defeated by the United States, Spain lost its last major colonies, ceding Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, while Cuba became independent under U.S. protection. After more than 4 centuries, the Spanish Empire collapsed, ending an era of global dominance and marking the close of one of history's most powerful empires. The Portuguese Empire, lasting from 1415 to 1999, was one of the longest-lived empires in history. It began with the conquest of Ceuta in North Africa, marking Portugal's entry into global expansion. Over the next century, explorers like Vasco da Gama and rulers such as King Manuel I built a network that stretched from Brazil across Africa, India, and into East Asia. Lisbon became a thriving capital of wealth and commerce, its people tied to the rhythms of the sea and global trade. Fortified ports, fleets of caravels, and access to spices and gold made Portugal a dominant maritime power. Yet this global reach carried immense strain. The Iberian Union with Spain from 1580 to 1640 weakened Portugal's independence and cost it vital colonies. Rivals like the Dutch, English, and French seized trading posts, and the empire's resources dwindled. In the 19th century, Brazil, the empire's richest colony, broke away in 1822. By the 20th century, wars of independence swept across Africa, with Angola and Mozambique declaring freedom in 1975 after Portugal's Carnation Revolution. The final chapter closed in Asia. On December 20, 1999, Portugal transferred Macau to China, ending nearly 6 centuries of empire. From the bold voyages of the 15th century to its final retreat at the dawn of the 21st, the Portuguese Empire's rise and fall tells the story of ambition, rivalry, and the inexorable tide of history. The British Empire, lasting from 1583 to 1997, was the largest empire the world had ever seen. From its first overseas colony in Newfoundland to vast dominions across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, Britain built its power on naval supremacy, global trade, and colonization. At its height in the 19th century, it spanned every continent, ruling over nearly a quarter of the world's population. London became the center of finance and commerce, while colonies supplied raw materials, labor, and markets. The empire left railways, industry, and legal systems in its wake, but it also brought conquest, famine, and resistance. Under leaders like Queen Victoria, Britain's global reach gave rise to the phrase, "the empire on which the sun never set." Yet the same wars that secured its dominance also sowed its decline. The First World War weakened Britain's economy, and the Second World War exposed its vulnerability. As nationalist movements rose, independence swept across the empire. India in 1947, Ghana in 1957, and dozens more through the 1960s and 70s. The Suez Crisis of 1956 underscored Britain's waning power, marking a turning point in its global role. The final act came in 1997, when Britain returned Hong Kong to China. After more than 4 centuries, the British Empire came to a close, dismantled not by conquest, but by the unstoppable tide of independence and self-determination. The French colonial empire, lasting from 1534 to 1980, was one of history's most powerful empires. It began when explorer Jacques Cartier claimed land in North America, marking the start of French ambitions overseas. Over centuries, France built colonies in the Caribbean, North and West Africa, the Middle East, Indochina, and the Pacific. At its height in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the empire stretched across 5 continents, ruling millions of people under the tricolor flag. French rulers presented their expansion as a civilizing mission, spreading language, law, and culture. Paris was portrayed as the heart of enlightenment, but daily life for colonized peoples was marked by inequality, forced labor, and resistance. Despite its vast reach, the empire faced constant challenges, from local revolts to rival European powers. The turning point came after World War II. France emerged weakened by occupation and war debts, while independence movements grew stronger. In Southeast Asia, the First Indochina War ended with the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, leading to independence for Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. In Africa, a wave of decolonization swept across the 1950s and 1960s as nations from Senegal to Madagascar gained sovereignty. The bloodiest struggle was in Algeria, where a brutal war from 1954 to 1962 forced France to grant independence. By the 1970s, most colonies were gone, and in 1980, the independence of Vanuatu marked the empire's end. Once a global power, the French colonial empire collapsed under the weight of resistance, war, and the unstoppable demand for freedom. The Russian Empire, founded in 1721 under Peter the Great, rose to become one of the largest empires in world history. Stretching across Eastern Europe, Siberia, Central Asia, and even into North America, it ruled over more than 125 million people by the dawn of the 20th century. For nearly 2 centuries, emperors and empresses like Catherine the Great and Alexander II projected absolute power, building a state rooted in autocracy, the Orthodox Church, and a rigid social order. Life inside the empire was marked by extremes. The nobility thrived in opulent palaces, while millions of peasants lived in poverty, bound to the land until serfdom was finally abolished in 1861. The empire produced towering cultural achievements in literature, music, and art, yet its society remained divided and restless. Militarily, it expanded into Central Asia and Eastern Europe, playing a decisive role in defeating Napoleon in 1812 and standing as a central force in European politics. But every victory masked deep internal weaknesses. By the early 20th century, the strain of modernization, the humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, and the brutal toll of World War I brought unrest to the surface. Bread shortages, mass protests, and military mutinies erupted in 1917, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate and ending more than 300 years of Romanov rule. Later that year, the Bolsheviks seized power, sweeping away the old order. The Russian Empire collapsed not with a single defeat, but with revolution. In its place emerged the Soviet Union, a new state born from upheaval, destined to shape the 20th century. The Soviet Union, officially founded on December 30, 1922, emerged after the Russian Revolution as a vast communist state stretching across Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. It became the world's largest country, covering 1/6 of the Earth's landmass, and was ruled by the Communist Party from its capital in Moscow. Leaders like Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, and finally Mikhail Gorbachev shaped its course. Life inside the USSR was defined by a planned economy, strict political control, major industrial and military achievements, and space race triumphs, but also shortages, censorship, and repression. For decades, the Soviet Union stood as a global superpower, locked in Cold War rivalry with the United States. Yet by the 1980s, its foundation was weakening. Economic stagnation, the costs of military expansion, and growing discontent in its satellite states exposed deep cracks. Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, were meant to revitalize the system. Instead, they emboldened calls for independence and democracy that Moscow could no longer suppress. In 1990 and 1991, republics like Lithuania, Ukraine, and Georgia declared independence. The failed August 1991 coup by hardline communists further eroded central authority. By December, the end was unavoidable. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as president, and the red Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. The following day, the USSR was formally dissolved. 15 independent nations emerged, and one of history's most formidable empires ceased to exist. The German Empire, known as the Second Reich, was proclaimed on January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles after Prussia's victory in the Franco-Prussian War. It united 25 states under King Wilhelm I of Prussia, who became the first German emperor, with Chancellor Otto von Bismarck as its architect. For nearly half a century, the empire grew into a European powerhouse. Its people experienced rapid industrialization, advances in science and technology, and the rise of a formidable military tradition. Prussia dominated the Federation, shaping its politics, army, and identity. Wilhelm I and his successor, the short-reigned Friedrich III, gave way to Wilhelm II in 1888, who pushed the empire toward aggressive foreign policy and global expansion. But the course he set brought danger. Germany's naval arms race with Britain, rising tensions with France and Russia, and ambitions abroad left it isolated. When the First World War erupted in 1914, the empire mobilized its vast resources, believing in swift victory. Instead, it was drawn into 4 years of attrition that drained its economy, devastated its people, and eroded public faith. By November 1918, defeat was certain. Revolution spread through the cities, the army mutinied, and the monarchy crumbled. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, fleeing into exile. 2 days later, the armistice was signed, ending the war. The German Empire was gone, replaced by the fragile Weimar Republic. Born of triumph in 1871, it fell just 47 years later in the wreckage of the Great War. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, forged by the Compromise of 1867, stood at the heart of Central Europe until 1918. It was a vast dual monarchy, ruled by Emperor Franz Joseph I, uniting Austria and Hungary under one crown, yet divided by language, culture, and nationalism. Its lands stretched from modern Austria and Hungary to the Czech lands, Slovakia, Croatia, and parts of Italy, Poland, Romania, and Ukraine. Vienna became a center of art, science, and music, while Budapest thrived as a rising capital. The empire commanded great military power on paper, but beneath its grandeur lay constant struggles, competing national identities, uneven economic growth, and political gridlock. The empire's fate was sealed in 1914. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, igniting World War I. Bound to Germany, it was drawn into a conflict it could not sustain. Years of fighting brought defeat after defeat. Food shortages starved the home front, and nationalist movements surged as Czechs, Slovaks, South Slavs, and others demanded independence. By autumn 1918, the empire was disintegrating. On November 3rd, Austria-Hungary signed an armistice, its army broken and its unity shattered. Just days later, Emperor Karl I relinquished power, and new nations, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Austria, and Hungary, emerged from the ruins. The Mongol Empire, founded in 1526, stood as one of the most powerful dynasties in Indian history. It began when Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, defeated the Delhi Sultanate at the Battle of Panipat, establishing control over northern India. Over the next century, the empire expanded under emperors like Akbar the Great, who united diverse communities through reforms, tolerance, and efficient administration. His successors, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, carried this legacy forward, funding art, literature, and monuments that defined an age of cultural brilliance. The Taj Mahal, built in the mid-1600s, remains the empire's most iconic symbol. At its height in the 17th century, the Mongol Empire ruled over much of the subcontinent, governing more than 150 million people and controlling vast wealth. But cracks soon appeared. Aurangzeb's long reign from 1658 to 1707 brought territorial expansion, but also religious conflict, heavy taxation, and endless wars that drained the treasury. After his death, weak rulers, corruption, and growing regional independence eroded central authority. By the 18th century, the empire was a shadow of its former self, as the Marathas, Sikhs, and other rising powers broke away. Meanwhile, European colonial companies, especially the British East India Company, tightened their grip on trade and politics. The final chapter came in 1857, when Indian soldiers launched a massive rebellion against British rule, declaring the aged Bahadur Shah II the symbolic leader. The uprising failed, and the British exiled him to Burma, marking the official end of the Mughal dynasty. After more than 3 centuries of grandeur, power, and decline, the Mughal Empire was swept aside, replaced by the British Raj. The Qing dynasty, ruling from 1644 to 1912, was the final imperial dynasty of China. Founded by the Manchus after the fall of the Ming, it grew into one of the largest empires in world history, stretching across East Asia and ruling over hundreds of millions of people. Under emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, the dynasty expanded its borders, secured stability, and fostered a rich cultural legacy. Society was deeply rooted in Confucian traditions, strict hierarchies, and a blend of Han Chinese and Manchu customs, creating a distinctive and enduring imperial identity. Yet beneath its prosperity, challenges mounted. By the 19th century, corruption and overpopulation strained resources, while Western powers forced humiliating concessions through the Opium Wars, leading to territorial losses and economic decline. Internal unrest shook the dynasty's foundations, most notably the Taiping Rebellion between 1850 and 1864, which claimed tens of millions of lives, and later the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, which drew foreign intervention and further weakened Qing authority. Attempts at modernization, such as the self-strengthening movement and late reforms, came too little and too late to restore the dynasty's standing. The breaking point came with the Wuchang Uprising on October 10, 1911, which triggered the Xinhai Revolution. One province after another declared independence from Qing rule. Finally, in February 1912, the 6-year-old Emperor Puyi was forced to abdicate, bringing the dynasty to an end. With the fall of the Qing, imperial rule in China collapsed after more than 2,000 years, replaced by the Republic of China, ushering in a new era of Chinese history. The Japanese Empire, lasting from 1868 to 1945, was born out of the Meiji Restoration, when centuries of feudal rule ended, and power was restored to Emperor Meiji. In just a few decades, Japan transformed from an isolated island nation into a modern industrial and military power. Located in East Asia, the empire embraced Western technology, reformed its military, and rapidly expanded its influence, while its people balanced modernization with deep traditions of loyalty to the emperor. Under Emperor Meiji and later Emperor Hirohito, Japan secured victories in the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 and the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, shocking the world by defeating 2 major powers. Japan annexed Korea in 1910, seized Taiwan, and grew into the dominant force in the Pacific. Cities thrived with railways, factories, and trade, while a growing culture of nationalism and militarism fueled its imperial ambitions. By the 1930s, Japan pushed further, invading Manchuria and later launching a full-scale war in China. Its attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 brought the United States into World War II, and at its height, the empire controlled vast stretches of East and Southeast Asia. But by 1944, crushing naval defeats, relentless bombing raids, and shortages weakened the empire. The decisive moment came in August 1945, when the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, and on September 2, 1945, the formal signing aboard the USS Missouri ended the empire. From that day, the Japanese Empire was gone, replaced by occupation, reform, and the birth of modern Japan. The Aztec Empire, founded in 1428, rose in the Valley of Mexico as one of the most formidable civilizations of the Americas. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, built on an island in Lake Texcoco, was a marvel of engineering, filled with temples, palaces, canals, and bustling markets. The empire was ruled by powerful Tlatoani, or emperors, including Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I, and later Moctezuma II. Through warfare, tribute, and strategic alliances, the empire expanded its reach, controlling millions across central and southern Mexico. Society was hierarchical, religion dominated daily life, and human sacrifice played a central role in honoring the gods and sustaining cosmic order. But in 1519, the arrival of Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés changed everything. With barely 500 men, horses, steel weapons, and firearms, Cortés forged alliances with indigenous groups like the Tlaxcalans, who resented Aztec dominance. As they advanced toward Tenochtitlan, waves of smallpox, introduced by Europeans, ravaged the population, weakening resistance. Moctezuma II welcomed Cortés into the city, but tensions exploded into violence, sparking open war. After months of brutal siege, famine, and disease, the capital fell on August 13, 1521. Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor, was captured, and the empire was absorbed into Spanish rule. In less than 3 years, a mighty civilization collapsed, conquered by foreign steel, native rivalries, and devastating plague. The Inca Empire, known as Tawantinsuyu, rose in 1438 and endured until 1533, stretching across the Andes and covering parts of modern Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia. From its capital at Cusco, it became the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas, ruling over as many as 12 million people. Its rulers, the Sapa Incas, beginning with Pachacuti and later Huayna Capac, transformed the empire into a powerhouse, constructing the monumental road system called the Chapac Ñan, building stone citadels like Machu Picchu, and organizing society through the Mita labor system. Agriculture thrived on terraced mountainsides, while quipus, knotted cords, kept track of the empire's complex records in place of writing. Yet this strength masked a growing vulnerability. Around 1527, Huayna Capac died, likely of smallpox brought by Europeans before their arrival. His death sparked a brutal civil war between his sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar. The conflict fractured the empire, drained its armies, and left its people divided. Into this turmoil marched Francisco Pizarro, leading just 168 Spaniards armed with steel, gunpowder, and horses. In November 1532 at Cajamarca, Pizarro seized Atahualpa in a carefully staged trap, despite facing thousands of Inca soldiers. The emperor offered a ransom of gold and silver to secure his release, but in July 1533, he was executed. Soon after, the Spanish captured Cusco, the Inca capital, bringing the empire's reign to an end. By the close of 1533, the once mighty Inca Empire had fallen, absorbed into Spain's expanding colonial empire. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.